So Exhibit A on the Romance for Geeks panel is my husband.
Bob Shaw's short story Light of Other Days.
That's how it's done.
1966. I guess it wasn't decades old when I read it, maybe a decade or two.
What is it?
Probably about two. It's called Light of Other Days by Bob Shaw.
Huh.
Analog 1966, and established from the stories. The glass which delays the passage of light by years or decades is used to construct windows called scene windows that enable city dwellers, submariners, and prisoners to watch live countryside scenes. Slow glass is a material where the light delay takes in passing through the glass is attributed to photons passing through a spiral tunnel coiled outside the radius of the capture of each atom in the glass. Shaw later reworked the stories into novel Other Days, Other Eyes. The slow light experiments are mentioned in Dave Eger's novel You Shall Know Our Velocity. Discworld, Turing Edge series, the light only travels a few hundred miles per hour due to Discworld's embarrassingly strong magic field. L'Humanité, a 1933 French novel, and something like that too, apparently. Yeah.
Okay. So technically we have a couple minutes to go, but I'm thinking maybe we'll go ahead and get started because there's a lot of people here. And I did kind of want to ask before we officially start, like, how many people here have read a romance novel, capital R, capital N, that they liked? I'm trying to kind of get a sense. Yay!
The funny thing is, I'm not actually a romance. I'm not generally a romance reader, so.
But you will have wonderful insights.
Yes.
So I'm trying to kind of get the temperature of the room. So how many people have sort of a conception of romance novels that they're all absolutely horrible? It's okay.
I think what you're looking for is cheap-ass Harlequin crap.
Yes, although I just have a 3-book deal to write cheap ass Harlequin crap.
That's awesome.
I'm so excited. But mine is non-fiction cheap ass Harlequin crap. They're doing a new digital line. So my first book is on TV and film adaptations of Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, and Wuthering Heights.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I have.
That's not fiction?
What?
That wasn't fiction?
Well, those are fiction, but I'm writing a comparison of the TV and film. So what I'm writing technically is non-fiction about fiction. It's like an analysis.
It's deep.
Right. Well,
That's deep.
it's very deep.
Well, I mean, the other thing is that cheap-ass Harlequin crap is a stereotype, because Harlequin actually published some reasonably well-written quality work. It just happens that Harlequin is the stereotypical romance publisher.
Yeah. So when I did start reading romance, it was kind of like my first thing was, well, I'll try this, but it's not like I'm reading Harlequin. And then I found out there's some really good Harlequin. So I just kind of wanted to get a sense of if I have a whole room full of people who are like, it's all terrible, or I have a mixed room, or how many people are you guys all writers here? How many people are writers? Room of writers.
Not a
Room of readers. Mixed readers and writers.
Mostly readers, couple writers.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right, well, with that background underway, we can kind of officially start. And I'm the moderator, and putting in quotes, because this is the second panel I've ever moderated. I'm very excited. And my name is Carrie Sessarego, and I started reading romance accidentally. And one thing I found is there's a lot of people who will tell you that they don't like romance, and then if you ask them what their favorite things are to read and watch, they'll list a whole bunch of romance. So I would have told you that I don't like romance, but I love, Han and Leia and the relationships in Joss Whedon, and it was all about those relationships. When I fell into the world of romance novels, it was really exciting to me to discover that while many of them are absolutely horrible beyond all belief, many of them are fantastic. And they're fantastic in the same way that any other genre can be fantastic. Good plot, good dialogue, good world building. I also got really excited when I found out that partly because of digital publishing, there's a huge subgenre now of science fiction and fantasy romance. So I started reviewing science fiction and fantasy romance for Smart Pictures Trashy Books, which I still do, and I have like a blog at growonline.com, and now I'm writing some analysis things, some critical essays
I didn't
for,
realize you did reviews for Smart Pitches.
what's that?
I didn't realize you did reviews for Smart
I'm
Pitches.
Carrie S.
Okay.
I'm the geek reviewer. So yeah, if you ever go on
I
Smart
don't read it
Pictures-
that often, but I occasionally get referred to it, and there's some really good stuff there.
Yeah, I'm curious, but I'll tell you a really funny thing is that one time you know the idea that there's always someone better, there's always someone who's better than you at everything. So there's a reviewer we have called Redheaded Girl, that's her name, and she's hilarious. And the person that runs the website, Sarah Wendell, every now and then she'll do the meanest thing to me, where she'll post me and Redheaded Girl reviewing the same book, but she won't tell us. So and you know how like sometimes there's like a little blurb where all you can read is the first 2 lines of a review? The review of the book that I had reviewed popped up, and I thought, that's a really funny opening sentence. I don't remember being that funny. I must have been really funny that day. And then I clicked on, like, I don't think I was that funny. And then I looked, and it was not me. No, it was a different person. So yeah, but so I do science fiction and fantasy for them, and now I do my own blog also. So I'm multitask. And Jon Del Arroz, am I saying your last name right?
Yeah, Jon Del Arroz.
Arroz?
So I'm primarily a fiction writer, and my claim to fame thus far has been the webcomic Flying Sparks, which is a comic about a hero and villain who are dating under their secret identities. So it is taking the superhero genre tropes and throwing a romance subplot that develops over the course of it, and eventually they'll figure out what their alternate egos are, and then their worlds will collide in more ways than one. My background in reading has always lended itself towards science fiction, and what I discovered in about when I was 14, 15, that I really enjoyed the science fiction with romance subtext. And it's not as niche as people would think. And where I discovered that is when I discovered Anne McCaffrey. I see a lot of smiles already with that. Anne McCaffrey, if you look at almost every one of her major popular novels, there's huge romance themes, and almost the main plots of them revolve around romance. And I read an interview with her in some magazine that was published in the 80s, and they said, well, and she actually wrote straight romance novels that were non-science fiction for a while before getting back into some of her science fiction work in the 80s. And they said, well, are you going to write any more romance novels? And she laughed and said, all of my novels are romance novels.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of genre blending that people, you think there's romance in one camp and science fiction readers in another camp. And but especially nowadays, it's anything's game, and I think Anne McCaffrey was big in pioneering that. So,
Andy Trembley, I am not a writer. I'm primarily a reader. Anne McCaffrey is a good point, because Anne McCaffrey is one of the classic examples of books that aren't what they look like they are. I mean, it's her fantasy books turn out to really be science fiction books once you get far enough in that the world building starts exposing itself. A lot of her science fiction books were much more fantasy and romance. The stuff that purported to be fantasy and or rather science fiction was much more fantasy and romance driven. But yeah, I'm a big fan of sciencey, plot-driven science fiction, but I'm also a big fan of character-driven, relationship-driven plots in science fiction. So there's a lot of crossover. I mean, none of this stuff is as cut and dried as any marketer wants it to be.
Can you introduce
Hi,
yourself?
I'm Jay Hartlove. I write thrillers. I don't write romance normally, except that I'm taking a break from scaring the hell out of everybody, and I'm writing a romance, and I'm writing it online. I read a chapter and posted it without looking back.
Oh, neat. It's like the old,
So it's serial.
old school
So
serial.
it's
Yes.
an old school serial.
nice.
Yes.
And I've got 5 chapters up, and I've got people on Twitter saying, "Oh, it's November, you should finish the book this month." I'm like, do you understand what that would involve? So I'm going to give it a shot. But it is since I haven't read that much romance, I've read a few, but I have always been drawn to stories that have romance in them. I was at a convention on a panel with Peter Beagle, who writes all this fantasy, and every time he would start to tell about a story, the panel was supposed to be about designing magic systems in fantasy. But every single story that he had to tell, when he was relating, I wrote a story about blah, 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 it would be actually a romance. That it was, the maid falling in love with the old wizard, or the farm boy falling in love with the witch, or whatever. And it's like somebody's always falling in love with somebody.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just where he comes from in his storytelling. And I thought, well, I've been thinking about this for a long time. So my story is actually it's a mermaid falls in love with man, and the story is actually a race relations story because her village and the human village don't get along. They hate each other. They're highly suspicious. And so I'm trying not to let it look too much like the stories from the Old South with the race relations issues. But that's really at the heart of it. It's a race relations story, but it's a romance. And so I had somebody ask me, said, so do you go the Romeo and Juliet route? And I said,
Romeo and Juliet's not a romance.
And I said, exactly. It's
Actually,
it's a bad example of a romance. But somebody asked me that.
it's totally not a romance. This
Yeah.
Carrie and I were talking yesterday
Yeah.
about starting.
You finish up, and then I'll talk about the difference between a
Right,
romance novel
right.
and a. I have like a 3-tier system.
Excellent.
So.
I definitely want to hear
Yeah.
that. So anyway, so it's so there's a lot of romance in it, and so people hear that I'm writing a romance, and they see the first 5 chapters up online, and they say, "All right, where's this going to go? Is this going to become erotica? Well, no. Is this going to become a tragedy? No." It's like all these people have these expectations of where a romance should go given my setup. And I actually had in mind to tell this adventure story about how he and she bridge the gaps. There's huge cultural differences, and we had a lot of fun making the cultural differences all the way down to their music and dance and everything was very, very different.
Yeah.
And so it's about bridging that with love.
Right, and that's when you're getting into science fiction and fantasy writing, you almost have to disguise the romantic elements up front because a lot of let's be honest, we're a heady group. We are a heady group, and a lot of us, even though it may be subconscious, but when we talk about romance in this context, it's like we almost have like a hives reaction to it. That we should have evolved beyond such base instincts in our science fiction. And so I actually do a lot of work disguising the romance elements in the subtext of other plots, even though it's integral. And I think that ends up being crucial to some of these stories.
Yeah, but the bit about Jay's story having a race relations, goes back to the stuff we were doing. So.
Oh.
No. Let me get.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
I should have left the doors open.
They have the chairs angled so that I can't come in. No, sorry about that. I didn't mean to disrupt. Just one
No, we're good.
Okay.
Come on in.
So I think she's actually trying to go south. She's going to go down.
So one of the things that I want to talk about a little bit before we got too deep into things is the difference between a romance novel and a novel with strong romantic elements.
Thank you.
Both, right, and both are things that are near and dear to my heart that I absolutely adore. So sometimes I use examples from Shakespeare like Romeo and Juliet. I would consider Romeo and Juliet, and these are all plays, not novels, but let's pretend they're novels because it makes my analogy.
It's all a story anyway.
Right, okay. So I would consider Romeo and Juliet to be a romance in the sense that it's a love story, but not a romance novel, because every romance novel promises you one thing, and only one thing. It doesn't matter if it's historical, or it's contemporary, or it takes place on spaceships. It has to deliver a happy ever after. HEA has to have the happy ever after. Without that happy ever after, not a romance novel. And if you are writing something with strong romantic elements and you decide you want to market it as a romance novel, beware. Make sure that if you're going to go there, you do deliver that happy ever after, because that's kind of the promise that we're given when we open the book. So Romeo and Juliet romance, or what I would call a novel, or I would call it a tragic romance. Henry the Fourth, the one where he has to court Margaret. I think I forgot which Henry that is. Anyway, long play, king, wars, St. Crispin's Day. He has to woo the Lady Margaret. Okay, novel with strong romantic elements. Not a romance novel because his whole thing with Margaret is not the focal point of the story. So it's got great romance in it, but I wouldn't call it a romance novel. What sets the romance novel aside from a novel with strong romantic elements is A, happy ever after ending, can't forget that. And B, the romance is the thing we care about more than anything else.
It's what drives the
It's
plot.
what drives the plot. It's not always what the characters care about more than anything else. I had this great conversation with Connie Willis, and she was talking about relationships in her stories and how she feels like they're much more interesting when the characters are worried about saving the world. You know, they're not all narcissistic all the time. Now, I do sometimes read novels that are more two people talking about their relationship with 300 pages, but a lot of what I read is very adventure plot driven. But I, the reader, want to know, are they going to get together? And if they save the world but they're not together, I won't think it's a happy ever after. Even though I have read other books that have strong romantic elements where maybe they didn't get together, but I was like, yeah, but they did save the world from alien invasion, so I guess it's okay. So that difference is very subjective and very fine line. Sometimes in marketing, the way that a publisher decides if something is a romance novel or a novel with strong romantic elements is the author male or female, which is sort of a sexist and irritating problem. Did anybody read the novel Warm Bodies? It's awesome, right? Well, what do you think? Is it a romance novel? What do we most care about in the story? What drives the story?
I think the whole situation about solving the conundrum of whether humanity will continue to exist or not. Because
Well, I would argue that in the zombie literature, that's what drives, like, Walking Dead or World War Z. Those are books where a lot of times they have a lot of romance. And this is, again, where the subjective thing comes into play, too. So I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm saying this is how I interpret that book. So World War Z, Walking Dead, those have tons of romance in them. But they're really examinations of how do we deal with this apocalypse and is the world going to survive. In Warm Bodies, the entire plot is driven by these two teenagers. One's a zombie, one isn't. Will they get these two wacky kids get together? The fate of humanity literally depends on them having a happy ever after. So it's not marketed as a romance novel, but I would argue that it's a great example of a romance novel that is marketed as something different.
And that's something a number of reviewers had also, a number of other reviewers have mentioned. But I mean, every genre, publishers have structural expectations of what this genre of, what a book that fits in this genre is. And yeah, they actually,
hoping to find the right author.
yeah,
Right.
they're going to sell a lot of books.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they want to find the right
And I
author.
mean, there are structural expectations, and you get the blurred areas of of urban fantasy versus paranormal romance. And again, in some cases, that falls down to is the author male or female, or who are they selling the book to?
Right, I don't think it's as much a function as the author male or female as
Who did the agent get the
who's
books?
the market,
Who's the publisher?
who's the target market. And if you see a vampire bite with a guy with chiseled abs and just wearing a hat or something like that and nothing else, they're targeting the young female romance demographic, which buys a lot of books. So it's, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Well, it's interesting to watch how some romance novels sort of develop different covers and different lives if they're wildly successful. And my favorite example. Oh, I should have brought it with me.
Let's try for a new audience, so put a different cover on it.
Absolutely.
I can't believe we didn't bring this. I have a copy of a book. This is a historical romance, not science fiction, called Flowers from the Storm. I have 2 copies. The second copy is kind of a tidy, I think it's blue, and it has some sort of like historical looking flowers on it. So it's obviously marketed towards women. There's no people on the cover. And this is a very angsty book. It is fantastic. It is one of the best pieces of literature I have ever read in terms of dialogue, character, setting, story. And the main character has suffered a stroke, and he's lost his ability to speak. And because of that, in this time, it's set in the Regency period, he is sent to an insane asylum because he can't talk. And this woman comes to work with him, and he starts to recover. And then it follows his journey back into his life as he tries to recover. When the book was first published, the publishers decided that what that book really screamed to them, this very serious examination of how he would recover, it said Fabio. And so the cover of this extremely intense, emotional book, I mean, I was just sobbing at the end of it, sobbing. And the cover is shirtless Fabio, and the background's all orange, and he's holding out this bouquet of flowers. There's no flowers. I guess they figured, okay, flowers from this or the, yeah. So it might, you know, the covers just change over time, and sometimes the book never makes it off the shelf, but you can see them trying to hit this different audience with every cover.
called? Flowers from what?
Flowers from the Storm by Laura Kinsale.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, it's so good.
And
So good.
I've seen that in the
Laura
cover.
Kinsale, a name that says quality romance.
I know. It's
I mean, it
so
really
good.
is. She's good.
She's amazing.
In the cover marketing, I've seen that recently. If you, I don't know, has anybody read Lois McMaster Bujold's most recent book, the Captain War Capitals Alliance? Well, that book has a lot of romantic comedy elements to it.
The civil campaign is total romance.
which is. She markets it as that. But if you look, her hardcover was originally because they thought her audience was this, you know, science fiction group. The hardcover has this picture of a flying car through this vast futuristic city. It's a beautiful cover.
Yeah.
And then the paperback came out, and they chose the back cover, which has Ivan sitting there with 2 like half-naked girls, you know, just lounging about on a couch, and
Which is much more representative.
which is much more representative of the book. But between the hardcover and the softcover, they decided, well, our target demographic is not the hard sci-fi reader that we come to anticipate. It is too.
Well, I think part of that was the hardcover was the classic Bane books cover.
Right.
Yeah.
And Bane looked at it and said, well, let's do a different cover for the soft cover. And actually, the thing is that with Ivan and the girls, Ivan lounging with the girls, they're still actually they're really still hitting the boy hard science fan base.
That's true. That's true.
It's really about Ivan and a girl.
A girl,
and
yeah,
she
correct.
generally has some kind of clothing on.
Really, that's
Yeah, it's not really like a bunch of naked people
Yeah.
flopping around.
But her bodyguard was, I think, naked most of the
That's
time.
true.
Yeah.
That's actually true.
Yeah, but yeah. So I mean,
It's
and,
blue with them on the cover.
yeah, and I mean, Lois is a great example because Lois is a great example for some amazingly awful reasons. None of it's her fault. None of it's actually even her publisher's fault. Most of it's her publisher's fans' fault. So Lois McMaster Bujold is a woman publishing with Bane Books. I've actually got friends who are editors there. They are best known for, I mean, Lois is publishing with them because she does military science fiction, and Bane looked at science fiction and said, there's a chunk of the fan base that is not that is not being served.
And that's their business model.
And what they would, and what it really turns out is there are folks who are too damn conservative to read stuff that might have any liberal taint on it. So we can sell stuff that has, that meets their themes. It's like, I'm not gonna blame Jim Bain for finding a niche in the market and exploiting it. And like I said, I've got friends who are editors there, and they do something, publish some really, really great hard science fiction, military science fiction.
There's
I mean,
always some flag.
gun porn romps that are absolutely hysterical and fun. And,
Yes.
but so there's Lois, and someone had made a comment. John Ringo had made the comment about how Bain Books, because it had this conservative bent to the kind of stories they tell, wasn't getting the authors and the editors weren't getting Hugo Awards because there was this liberal elite conspiracy keeping them from getting their rockets they deserved. Oh no, John Ringo. But the comment was, well, you know, Lois, prolific writer, published by Bain, buckets of Hugo Awards.
Yeah.
I mean, this year Tony Weisskopf for Bain got a Hugo Award, but there was some fallout after that. I think, well, but Lois isn't really doing hard science fiction. She's really a romance writer who's just faking her way through this. It's like,
Well, of course, what's awesome about Lois and Master Patrol is that in her Vorkos,
Vorkosigan.
thank you, gosh, in that series that you should all be reading. She is one of those authors who is not afraid of any genre, and I just love that. I found that personally, when I let go of this snobbery thing, and it just really, it's like opened up whole new worlds. So some of her stuff is just pure hardcore, hard sci-fi within one series with the same characters. Some of it is, I'd say, sci-fi with strong romantic elements. Some of it is romantic comedy. Some of it is mystery that happens to also involve a sci-fi setting. And it's all the same worlds. It's the same universe.
she's an artist and she's a craftswoman.
Yeah.
And she does something that Terry Pratchett does, that various other authors do,
Yeah.
that have got established series of okay, now we're going to, in this world, I'm going to do my take on mystery. I'm going to do my take on romance, or I'm going to do my take on this. And Lois does it well.
And more recently, it's been more on the romantic side of things. I mean, the last several books have had that heavily in her themes. And I remember when she took a break from the universe, actually, and because even though she was she was always writing sci-fi with the romance twist, sci-fi with the mystery twist.
Uh-huh.
So she wanted to take a break and write something that was romance with a fantasy twist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when she came out with her Sharing Knife series, which is a pure, I mean, it is a classic style romance progression throughout the books. And I mean, they weren't as well received, and I've read those books. I mean, they're brilliant. But what's interesting is you get typecast, I think, as a certain thing. Like you were mentioning with Bain Books, they have a typecast. And so they had to produce that cover because that's their typecast.
Well, and it's also, it's Lois's cover art. There's the cover artist that they used for Lois's books forever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they do something based on this sketch, or rather based on this precis, and that's what the artist turned out. So.
Yeah,
It's interesting, I mean, what you said earlier about Bain does military science fiction, this is a niche, you understand, and all that.
It's not just military science fiction, but yeah.
But when you're talking about that as a niche, and Lois writing for and it's funny, if I had known that, I may never even read Shards of Honor in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Because somebody just handed it to me and said, you should read this.
Yeah.
I never even thought of it as military, although both of the main characters were members of the military.
And I mean, and it is a case of she writes very strongly character-driven, even when it's not romance-based. Because if she wasn't doing the deep character analysis, it would just be the cliched, overachieving cripple story. But that's not, and frankly, that is a cliched story. But it's something that the way that Miles is not he has special things because he's crippled. It's like, no, he's handicapped, and he has to work his ass off to get everything that he gets. And he does that because he's trying to overcome his handicaps. And it's not, like I said, it's not the Magic Cripple Kid story, which too many.
So on cliches, it's very easy to automatically come to thoughts of cliches in the romance genre. So my question to you guys, what do you do, or what do you like to see in a romance story to avoid those sort of cliches that, so it doesn't end up the automatic arc of boy meets girl, or girl meets boy nowadays, and they get together for a little bit, but on a surface level, somebody screws up real bad and they hate each other, and then they get back together at the end. How do you avoid that?
Well, that's
Amnesia.
that's
That's my least favorite one.
that is a problem in a lot of romance, particularly self-published romance has its own different problems, but for stuff that goes through the major publishing houses,
Yeah.
I mean, there is a very strong formula that you're expected to follow if you're publishing through a major publishing house and publishing romance. The plot is expected to flow in this way, in this time, in this kind of pacing, in these kinds of this, and then this gets in the way, and then this gets in the way, and how do they overcome it?
Right.
It is structurally, it's a very, very tight structure that you're expected to
Stop the
follow.
wedding!
Yeah, and it's difficult to not just fall into the standard cliche ways of creating roadblocks for your
Well,
characters.
depending on, again, which audiences they're trying to aim for, if it really is one of these formulaic romances, then people who read formulaic romances, they're expecting that.
Oh,
they want to read
That's
that.
true.
That's their
But what
comfort
really
zone.
excites people about formulaic romance is when the formulas, it's like any other trope, like any other trope in fiction. So you guys all know the website TV Tropes, okay? All right, so they say not all tropes are bad. My personal least favorite, I have two in romance. One is The Secret Baby, and the other one is my personal favorite, Amnesia. And I say it like that because I'm so tired of reading about amnesia that if I'm writing about it in a review, every time I say the word amnesia, I do it in caps lock with an exclamation point. We have amnesia! But I have read books that take amnesia and they do it in a fresh way. They find a way. You have amnesia. I think your book does.
Amnesia is what happens before the story starts.
Okay. So you can find a way to take those formulas. It is just the same tired formula. Most really discerning readers do not like that. But we do like the idea that we kind of know this is going to end up okay. We kind of know where this is going. We kind of know what to expect in terms of pace. But to shake it up and to make it fresh, that's really exciting to see.
I mean,
I
that's-
took it as a personal challenge to start with something that I knew was radioactive, bad thing,
Yeah.
and said, all right,
Is there a secret baby?
there's got to be amnesia.
Okay, but I
No, there's
think
no
there
secret
needs to be
baby.
amnesia
No,
and a
no,
secret
Secret clone baby!
Well, they told you
There is
before because of the
there is cloning, but no, it's not a baby. There's no baby involved. No, that was the challenge, was to be able to find a way of making it interesting.
Yeah.
Because I took a cue from some of the classic medical thrillers where you think you've got it figured out in the first 50 pages. Oh no, you don't. And so that was where I did, was I started with the character who starts with amnesia, and by page 50 you think, okay, we understand where this is going, and no, you don't. So that was my way away from the amnesia trope.
Cool.
Would the happily ever after thing, would the contract be fulfilled if they both end up happily ever after but not with each other?
It depends. So I have read, and again, this is very subjective.
Not with the classic formula, but
Well, I have read,
Enchanted.
it just depends on how well it's written. If they sell it, just like how well do they sell Faster Than Light travel? It can be ridiculous or it can be sublime. So I have read some where all of a sudden I'd spent the whole book thinking two people were going to get together, and we got to like the last 20 pages, and all of a sudden it was like, switch! And that was just like really jarring. I didn't like that.
They didn't foreshadow it well?
No, they didn't foreshadow it well. There was no build. There was no reason to think they were together. Actually, a really good example of that is I read a Star Wars novelization. It was one of the first romances I reviewed because I wanted to read something that I thought was romance that wasn't marketed as romance. And I apologize because of course now I can't think of the name of it, but it was one of the Timothy Zahns, and I've heard he's fabulous, but this was not his finest moment. And he had this whole like, it was all about Han and Leia, and they were running off doing their thing, and I love Han and I love Leia, so I thought it would be great. But there was a beta couple. A lot of times there's the main couple,
Right.
and then there's like a side couple.
You're
Really,
plot.
a lot of really great romances have great ensemble casts, and that also helps kind of keep it fresh, so it's not all narcissistic.
And that keeps the series going too, so if you're doing one book, you can focus on one pairing, and then the next book you can focus on the next one, right?
Right, because let me do this and then come back to that, because I do want to touch on that. So with this Han and Leia book, there was a beta couple, and they did the thing where like the beta couple was going along, and all of a sudden, switch, they ended up with other people, and there was like no reason to think that they would end up with people, except that they were the only people with appropriate plumbing, like on the map.
And
They had matching parts. That was it.
In some ways, that falls into the curse of someone who's a good writer, who is a good genre writer,
Yeah.
who decides it's time to dabble in another genre, and doesn't realize that doesn't realize that they haven't learned, there are rules, and other people have learned to break the rules better than they
Well,
have.
consistency of character and logic still has to hold up no matter what. You
Right.
can't have
Yeah.
shit coming out of the hat. It just doesn't
Exactly.
work.
Yeah, but it's,
I mean, my blacksmith and my mermaid, they don't have parts that match, and it's going to work anyway.
Yay.
So, you know,
What I've been doing in my most recent to trick people out of the formula, which the formula is there unfortunately, but I trick people into thinking it's not there, is usually the first named people who meet, who have a lot of detail about them, are the ones to get together, and you root for them to get together the whole time. So I spend my first couple chapters of the main protagonist meeting a different female, and being interested in her, as you know, as people would want to do with attractive others, and then when then suddenly he meets the other one a couple chapters down and goes, oh gosh, forget about you, and to avoid the main typical genre flow of things and trick the audience, which is I went for that purposefully, and it has thrown some people off who are more standard romance readers, but the more standard sci-fi readers that I talk to really appreciate that I'm not just telling the same story.
even if you run the risk of having your protagonist seem fickle.
Right.
yeah, because I mean, for example, I'm
Right. That is the problem.
Which is a problem with him
Yeah.
being sympathetic if he's like, oh, well, here comes something else.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm a big fan of police procedurals, and you watch a police procedural on television, and all of a sudden you watch enough of them, and you realize, I look at the order that the characters appear and how many lines they have, and I now know who the villain of the story is.
Yeah.
Because unless they're for some reason intentionally breaking the rules and having the villain be someone who is totally off screen and you never see, which sometimes you can pull off, but
Yeah.
it's difficult.
It's difficult.
It's the you sit there and it's like one of your villain at the end of the police procedural is going to be someone that you've gotten to know during the show, and in theory you're going to be surprised that this is the villain. And of course, because I'm watching this kind of stuff all the time, it's like, okay, main character, side character, side character, third side character. Second guy is the guy who's the villain.
And
It just happens watching NCIS.
Well, and to get back to something you said, pointed out really quickly, all the rules of good writing actually do come into play with a romance novel, and I think what some people do. So one of the commentators on Smart Pictures actually had this conversation. They said they were at the drugstore and this guy came up and he's like, "Hey, can you tell me what's a good romance novel? I have to read one." And she's like, "Why?" And he said, "Well, I figured out there's this formula and I figure I can make a lot of money, so I'm gonna like write a bunch and make a lot of money." And she's like, "Well, have you read any?" He's like, "Well, no, you don't need to read them. You just like need the formula and you plug stuff in, you know, which just duh." So yes, it's a genre, like mystery is a genre, science fiction is genre, fantasy is genre, but you still have to have all the things that make a book good, no matter what genre it's in. The best mystery has a formula, right? We're probably going to find out who did it, but it has good pacing, good plot, good dialogue, good characters, good world building. Best science fiction, it might have aliens with tentacles, it might be like very cerebral with these high quantum concepts, but you've got your good pacing, your good plot, your good dialogue, your good characters. it's just, good writing is good writing. And you can't just substitute formula for good writing.
Do you have a question, Emily?
Oh, well, we'd have to back up, but back when you were talking about, I think the
We
question.
can back up.
What if two people, or what if the hero and heroine each end up with somebody else, not the,
Well, we were saying, we were talking, we mentioned
We were
Enchanted.
just talking
And,
about
no, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
when he said it earlier, I don't know if anybody reads Gillian Bradshaw, she's not all that big in this country, but, I was thinking of that as an example where she was so determined to stay with the formula. I mean, she had a good hero and she had a good heroine, but the hero spent most of the book trapped as a wolf. And the heroine very nicely did all these things to rescue him
Yeah.
and turn him back. But unfortunately, her companion, through all these things she had to go through to rescue the hero, was this really great guy who I found myself liking a lot more than the hero. And since they had spent all this time together,
Right.
I said, she hasn't even seen the hero since the first chapter of the book.
Yeah.
She should be with this
running
guy.
out with Matthew Broderick.
And
Yeah.
but the author stuck to the formula, and they transformed the hero, and they got together, and I'm thinking, I really like that other guy.
I have a really good example of that in fantasy that really pissed me off. And it was, do we have any Wheel of Time readers here? None.
Most
Wow.
most of it, but I never. I only got like 10 books into it before I got sick of it.
Okay. Well, in the first book,
If you
Jordan
don't
really
want
makes.
spoilers, go la, la, la.
This isn't a big spoiler. It's a romance subplot that he's got so many subplots, but that's another story.
Because subplots have subplots.
Right. But it spends the whole book, the typical fantasy story where you've got a boy in the village and the girl in the village, and they've gone off on their heroic adventure, and they're going to fall in love with each other, of course, and they've been in love with each other. They're expected to fall in love with each other. They do love each other, and they spend the book getting together, and their journeys kind of separate. Well, 3 books later, they have the main character hook up with some other girl. And I almost put the series down. I said, you promised me for this whole series that these people were going to get together, and it didn't happen. Now,
And he was never as good as George R. R. Martin for doing the curveball that
right.
just
Yeah.
totally
And it
fucked
wasn't
up.
really. It's like he planned to do that, but then changed it later. But I thought about it after a while, even though I got really angry about it. And I'm obviously a big Wheel of Time fan. And life happens like that, and you can plan your relationship with somebody, and I mean we've all probably been there, where we had our high school love who we were going to be with for the rest of our darn lives, and as sometimes actually with my parents it ends up that way, but for the most part you kind of move on and forget about them, and they can become a friend or not even an important part of your life, and it's realistic. It's cool.
And you can show, like when you set up this couple, that if you're going to want to switch couples, okay, first of all, please don't switch couples because you suddenly realize that you don't know what to do and you have 30 pages left of your book, because that's just not going to happen. But you can set it up so that first relationship, something is off. So the reader knows that maybe they're supposed to end up together because they're the first named potential couple, so they're probably going to end up at the end. But as a reader, you're like, yeah, but
There's something not right here.
Yeah.
Foreshadow the fall.
it doesn't work. And it doesn't have to be a big thing either. Like lots of times in relationships in real life, it's the like kind of petty things that try to work. Something that's not a good fit. And then you introduce this other character and you start to introduce the idea that actually they're a good fit. So you're building it as you go. You're not just suddenly like dumping it.
But then, like I said, Jay had mentioned one is the classic send-up of the Disney fairy tale romance, and nobody parodies Disney like Disney, is Enchanted.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
you've got your prince and your princess, and they have to end up with other people because they really, really don't belong together.
Right. And there was like no sense that I've now seen that movie 5,000 million times. And I'm never thinking, oh, well, that's wrong because the prince and the princess should be together. You know something is not right from the beginning, and then they carefully build these other relationships.
It is the Disney fairy tale romance, which is a very, very specific formula. And like I said, Disney does Disney well, and nobody parodies Disney like Disney.
People seeing Enchanted 5,000 million times? Yeah. Cool. You had a question earlier.
It's a charming little film.
Check.
Yeah, well, back to Game of Thrones. I mean, Jaime and Cersei Lannister is really a beautiful
There's
story.
this stuff. Enchanted to Game of Thrones. Oh, and while we're talking about blood and guts, we just jump right into what?
That's a princess story. story.
Well, actually, I mean, it's a weird
I just love your segue.
No,
That's awesome.
But I mean,
So
it
the
is.
reason it's palatable is because if you took the incest out, yeah, they would be a great couple.
It's a
Yeah.
well, it's a weird princess story, and in some ways, it does. I mean, one of the things in classic, in modern standard romance is finally modern romance. The women in modern romance actually have a reasonable level of agency.
Yeah.
And that's something that, for all the people complained about Game of Thrones, there is no lack of agency among the women in Game of
Yeah,
Thrones.
they're running the show.
And even in more, there's been huge changes in the romance novel industry. So back in what we call old school romance, back in the day, so like the 70s and 80s, which cracks me up.
Damsel in
This is
distress
what we're
romance.
talking about as old school, right? So a lot of times what you had then was sort of a rapey hero, and the idea was you had this sort of, you had this sort of
A lot of erotica still written like that.
Even-
a lot of it is. So you had this sort of woman who had the bodice, right, that would be ripped, and you had this sort of angsty man who was very bad and controlling, and by the end it would be okay, they'd end up together. And
Because the
and-
conflict,
Grey.
what was driving the conflict in those romances was the heroine hating the hero.
Right,
Yeah.
because
And of course-
he was a rapey bastard.
But of course, him being a rapey bastard was actually what brought him over.
But it's still popular because 50
It's the
Shades of
technical
Grey
term.
sold off the shelves.
Oh.
Yes, they did, and there
You
are
mean 50 Shades of Twilight?
Well,
there are many
It's the same
many
formula, though,
essays
that he's
about
an
why that was
Well,
so successful.
Well, it's Twilight fanfic with the serial
Well,
numbers filed off.
Well, the elephant in the room in this whole genre is Twilight.
yeah.
And,
Oh yeah, that's.
and everybody wants to make fun of it. And I was actually talking about this over over the table at lunch today. As much as that fits every romance genre trope there is to the point where it nauseates a lot of us science fiction readers, it got a lot of people to read.
Yeah.
It did, yeah.
And it had an emotional level where it connects with people. And
But there's a lot of creepiness in it.
there's a lot of
It is.
creepiness in it, and
But, like,
that's
I
what
mean, we're back to the rapey hero.
And,
Yeah.
and we're, well, like, I have not actually read
Standing there
50 Shades
watching
of
her
Grey,
sleeping.
but doesn't 50 Shades of Grey have like very dominating,
50 Shades of Grey is Twilight fanfic.
manipulative hero?
It-
Very-
fi-
With spanking.
50 Shades of Grey is admittedly Twilight
Twilight
fanfic
fanfic.
with the names filed off of it, and
And
bad. It's actually, and the problem is it's bad
supernatural
erotica. It's
Yeah.
yeah, with the supernatural element take on, and it's really bad erotica. I mean, I have a bunch of friends who there's a gang of women who they want to go and like whenever they see someone reading 50 Shades of Grey, substitute with Folger's Crystals, aka a decent BDSM erotica novel, because it's really bad BDSM.
Yeah, it's the difference between BDSM and abusive relationship.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is that there is a chunk of
It's just meanness.
no, there's a chunk of the old school romance where it was abusive relationship glorifying romance.
Horrifying, yeah.
Yeah.
You see less of that now,
Whereas
but it seems
make
like
your
when it is
abusive
it's like,
relationship more acceptable
yeah,
Yes.
because your abusive relationship is just like the one in this book.
yeah.
It's like that story of that abusive relationship has been published for so long, like, even though our thought patterns have changed about it over the past 20, 30 years,
Yeah.
it is, like you said, highly successful when it does happen again, because it is in our collective consciousness, like, ooh, I missed that, Yeah, it's like watching a train wreck,
Yeah.
I guess,
I mean, for me, reading romance has made me more feminist. It makes me feel like a stronger, smarter person. Like I see patterns in romance of how you can assert yourself in a relationship and assert yourself otherwise. How can you live without a relationship? How can you communicate inside a relationship? But even though like a lot of times we're like, oh, romance is that old school, we just don't even talk about that. But it is still there. It never went away. And when it does kind of flare up as a hit, it's like a huge hit. So, and that's like many panels worth of discussion. But I mean, and that's another thing. But I think to keep in mind about romance is that it's not all the same. There's lots of viewpoints. Did you have a question in the back a while ago?
I just wanted to mention, you were talking about the rapey hero, and I think one of the most important things in the story is that I didn't hear anybody mention, was that the heroine changes the hero.
Yeah.
True.
And that makes it a whole other path.
Yeah,
No, that is critical.
Yeah,
That
very
is
critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that's why it's
And-
acceptable.
Yeah.
in modern-
Absolutely. No humming, that's a big deal. And
No, it is a big deal, but sometimes the change is less real and more
More
surface.
surfacey.
And
I would say there's a
actually, I mean-
difference between a
Let me
good one and a
just
bad
say,
one.
I'm not saying this is a
True.
good thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
personally, I feel like Dorothy Parker, I could not finish this novel, I had to fling it away violently.
Yeah,
But
Multiple
the
times.
fact that, I probably misquoted it, I apologize. The fact that in the story, there's the impression given that the woman has somehow changed the man is what makes them acceptable, I believe,
Yeah.
to a great many of the young women or older women who are reading.
Well, yes,
this.
absolutely.
Because then
That's
they
true.
become
Well, and that's a
nurtured
chunk
by
of-
the man.
Rather than,
And these women are living in a world where they have to nurture everyone in the entire family.
And that's a chunk of real life relationship disaster is they,
yeah,
but I can change him.
well,
Yeah.
And that's
well,
where that kind of
well,
story is
well,
actually
that's-
bad for people.
But that's why you read, that's why the fantasy works.
Yeah.
Because it used to be, you can accept the abusive relationship you have with your drunken husband because it's just like the romance that you're reading for pleasure on your own time. Well, now you're in an abusive relationship. If you buy into this fantasy, then you believe that it's possible to change people.
Yeah.
So there is a way out, but it's also then encourages people to think that this is somehow more applicable to their lives. I mean, they
Yeah.
want to be in a abusive relationship, but if they are, well then, she seems to have influenced him and changed him. Maybe that'll work in real life, or
Yeah.
even if it's just the fantasy that it will work, that's the hook
Mhm.
that took it from being just another book to this, amazingly popular book.
and one of the.
You resent-
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
please.
question.
I have a question.
Yeah,
So the idea that the heroine changes the hero is kind of like Beauty and the Beast story, right?
Yeah.
They start monsters.
And in itself is not a bad thing.
Right. So I saw this TED Talk that talked about how to maintain passion in a long-term relationship, and it discussed that in order to have really good sexual chemistry, there has to be a sense of mystery and a sense of otherness. But in order to have a good intimate relationship, there has to be familiarity and closeness and trust. Yes. So a good relationship by that formula is the death of good sex. So I was wondering if
Yeah,
in this,
by that.
if in this context, and knowing that the Beauty and the Beast
All
story
things in
appears in so
moderation.
many different cultures,
right.
is there a psychological need to have like a rapey hero?
I don't think there's always a need to have that because most romance now, and I feel pretty safe saying most, even though it's not like I've taken an inventory of like every book on the shelf, but a
You're an
lot of
expert.
romance now
It's
is
okay.
it's more, I'll say a lot. A lot of romance now is more focused on the idea that the hero and the heroine both have flaws, but they change each other. So like, for instance, Darcy in Pride and Prejudice, okay? The romance novel is Pride and Prejudice. And Darcy is a great example of an old school alpha hero, but he's not a rapey bastard, right? He's mysterious, he's brooding, he says something mean about Lizzie the
He's a
very
little bit of a
first
jerk.
time we meet him. He's kind of a jerk,
He's
right?
insensitive.
But being
Yeah.
a jerk and being rapey.
Right, but
It's
he's
a
never
different
rapey.
thing.
And here's the thing, when he says something mean about Lizzie, he doesn't know she's listening.
That's true.
When he breaks up Jane and Bingley, he thinks that Jane is not interested in Bingley. So Darcy is mysterious and brooding and a lot of those kind of alpha hero traits, but he's not malicious. He's never malicious, and he's always there for Lizzie when she absolutely needs him. When the shit comes down, Darcy moves in to save the day over and over again. So I think that the alpha brooding hero has never lost its appeal. It's not the only kind of hero we see in romance now, but it's still really popular. But I think you can be that mysterious person without having that sort of violent, controlling overlay. Darcy's not very controlling. He's just kind of rude. You know, he is snobby, and he's kind of insensitive to what's going on around him.
There's the name of the book too.
Right?
There's the name of the book.
I mean, that's,
Right,
yeah.
that's the point of the book. And
Right.
also, that's a great
Prejudice.
example of the importance in a great romance of both characters changing. Even though they also both value each other as how they are. So Lizzie never tries to turn Darcy into some kind of guy who loves to party, right? And Darcy never tries to turn Lizzie into this person who will sit in the drawing room and do needlework forever and ever and never open her mouth. But they both learn to be more flexible about how they assess other people, prejudice. They both learn to be less snotty, pride. They both become better people through their relationship with each other. That's really pivotal in romance. And Sometimes people will try to play that out in this sort of old school rapey hero romance, which doesn't appeal to me at all, but some people like it.
I think that's the nuance, is what your starting point and what people are changing from.
Yeah.
Are they changing from something like Darcy, where, I mean, he's a bit rude, he's a bit snotty, or are they changing from rapey Rick Raperson, who,
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, this is, I'm suddenly going to, I'm wavering between being in the front row and being up here. Because I'm in the middle of writing one of these things, so I'm taking all of your advice very seriously. I have this cultural difference, and one of them thinks one way and the other thinks the other way. By the end of the book, they've learned to think like the other one, and that's how this all.
Now, is this pure romance, or does it have fantastical elements?
It's a mermaid story. It's all
Okay.
kinds of
It's a
fantastical elements.
romance novel that is set
My
with
question,
fantasy characters.
Right.
Right.
yes. So my question is, in terms of point of view, okay, I don't expect a lot of, guys to be reading this. I could be wrong. I'd be pleasantly surprised if there were more guys reading it. But if I'm going to have a lot of women reading this, then should I be telling it mostly from her point of view, or can I trade off? Because I'm splitting it right down the middle.
Oh.
I'm showing how he's falling in love with her every
Yeah.
bit as much as I'm showing how she's falling in love with
It's
him.
pretty standard to split it about 50-50. Yeah.
It's interesting because in the rapey hero days, which remember you're talking about like mystery and we don't know what's going on with this person, at that time it was less common to split it right down the middle. So part of the mystery was that the heroine was always like, why has he tied me up and thrown me onto his pirate ship? What could he be thinking? And we never knew what he was thinking.
I knew exactly what he was thinking.
and frankly, that was one of those things that,
It's sort of
that was-
implied with his thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's told entirely from her point of view. Right.
Now
Sure.
it's more common to split it 50-50, which I think is partly because of that idea that you're seeing a more equal relationship. You're seeing, more, even if their circumstances aren't equal, their investment in what's going on is, and our
Well,
involvement in them.
and maybe the hero's motivation isn't as rapey anymore.
And it goes back to what you were saying about agency too.
Mhm.
In that the female protagonists now are making their own decisions 100%. They're not being forced into things as much. So
It might be that you've got two ways of following the formula where the protagonist man starts off looking like someone you wouldn't want to deal with, and then ends up as the main romantic lead, and he's okay. One way would be the woman changes him, but another way would be the woman misunderstood him at the start, and he's actually not as bad as she thought, and that's sort of the Pride and Prejudice way to do it, it sounds like. And if you're going to go that way, then you have to avoid what is he thinking from the start.
You have to keep him mysterious.
Yeah.
Right, because otherwise there would be no sense that she's misunderstood him reasonably, because you know what he's thinking.
I think a really good example of how you can do an old school romance where you have a redeemable hero is Mel Jean Brooke writes these amazing steampunk romances. And if you haven't read Riveted, just get up right now. Go read it. Just you all can order it like on your phones, right? It's so good, you guys. But she
I'm
wrote
sure one of
it.
the booksellers in the dealer's room might have it, but
Oh, it's just
Maybe.
the best
What's
thing.
is the author of the name?
Mel Jean Brooke, Brook. And the one that I love by her is called Riveted. But she wrote another one. It's an earlier one in a connected series where you don't see much of the characters between books. Every book is self-contained, but it's a shared world. The first book is Iron Duke. And Iron Duke is a fantastic book, but it is not my favorite. My favorite is Riveted, because Iron Duke has this kind of old school alpha hero. Old school alpha heroes do not float my boat, but I have to admit that if you want to see one written really, really well, where you understand his motivations, where he takes responsibility for his actions, where you see the growth of change, if you gotta read an old school hero, read Iron Duke. She does a very good job with him. She almost made me not climb into the book and strangle him with my bare hands.
that's an interesting question. Now we pointed out some notable exceptions here, but from your perspective, especially as a reviewer, have you noticed still that there's a delineation where romance seems to be a lot more acceptable in a fantasy setting than a science fiction setting, on average?
I haven't, but that might be biased because of what comes to me. Like I started off with Smart Fiction Trashy Books as a geek reviewer, and most of what kind of has come around is sci-fi, oddly enough. Now there's tons of fantasy romance. It's just what lands in my inbox keeps being science fiction.
Right. If you look at bookshelves and bookstores, there's a lot more paranormal romance and fantasy set romance on shelves. There isn't as much of a science fiction romance. You don't see as big of a science fiction romance section in a bookstore. If you even see a science fiction romance section in a bookstore, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just not a market category.
Where it exists is online.
Yeah.
So that those digital presses, like Carina Press, has tons of science fiction romance.
Yeah.
It's such a tiny niche market that it's like the world of digital publishing just suddenly made that possible.
It's
Why
not
do
something
you
traditional.
think the niche is so tiny?
I don't know, because I know an awful lot of people who like science fiction.
Yeah, I think it's a publishers and girl cooties question.
Yeah.
It's the women don't read science fiction, and men don't read romance, and men read science fiction, and it's
Yeah.
somebody in publishing companies.
Why
would you mix oil and water?
And those same people who say that will tell you that they like Han and Leia from Star Wars.
Mhm.
The same people who tell you that will overlook the numbers that 45% of the people who went to Avengers on opening weekend were women.
Yeah.
Okay, over half of the people who went to Comic-Con last year were women. So
Yeah.
at some point, I would love to just like stop having this conversation and just be like, duh!
There's
Of
people-
course men like love stories, of course women love science fiction.
Yeah, and there are people who, it doesn't matter how many statistics you hand them, how many studies you show them, how much market
Right.
research gets handed to them, they're gonna stick with what they believe.
Yeah.
So, Mao.
I did market research back in 2007 when I was working for SkillJam, which is a casual game provider. We wanted to make a comparison between casual game users and romance. It was a brainstorm I came up with. But, and I had to do the research, and funny enough, they're very comparable.
That's actually a big overlap.
Yeah, a huge overlap, and what really surprised me was that 35% of your romance novel, romance readers are men. So 35% is
Wow.
nothing to be sneezed at.
Mhm.
Now I'm going by 2007 numbers here, but we also found that in the overlap, I also read that when you go into a Barnes and Noble and you see the computer book section and you see, housing and repair and do-it-yourself, you see the fiction section, you see mysteries, you see all the other genres. Okay, they fit into this they're just a small category. The rest is all romance. Romance novels are 50% of all published.
For sure. Traditional
So
publishing.
it is a market not to be.
Wow.
Did we talk about Nicholas Sparks yet?
What, about what?
No.
Yeah, okay, so it came out recently, so there was some blog that said Nicholas Sparks ruined my day or something like that. And basically she was a big fan, went to one of his signings, and he was really adamant that he would not categorize himself as romance, he would not categorize himself as chick lit. What he categorized himself was his romance tragedy. And so she follow-up question was, can you name any women authors that write romance tragedy? It's like, oh no, they haven't really broken into that market yet.
Wow.
Emily Bronte? What?
Yeah,
So,
we'll have to send her a memo.
Well, but I mean,
so I was wondering, how much is marketing determining consumption, or vice versa?
I don't think marketing determines consumption. Marketing just determines,
It's
yeah,
a chases
yeah,
consumption.
yeah.
It chases consumption.
yeah. And the thing is that tragic romance is not the standard romance formula. I mean, it does, but some of that is, this also sounds like Margaret Atwood being pissy about not being science fiction because she doesn't have bug-eyed monsters in her books.
Yeah.
She's since gotten over that kind of a little bit maybe, but
I mean, yes, once in a while you want a good crop, but most of the time you think of a romance, you want the happy ending.
Right.
Well, it's all about how it's
So
sold
it's-
to you.
yeah.
So I read plenty of sad books, and I read plenty of tough, gritty books, and there are books that I consider have happy, like Lord of the Rings. Not everybody goes running around happy as can be at the end of it, but I'm passionate about Lord of the Rings. I love it. But if it's a romance novel couple or a couple in, it has to have that HEA. That's like a sacred promise.
The tragic romance thing may actually be driven by, you write tragic romance and you may never sell it to a traditional romance publisher.
True.
Because, so that might just be defensive against I'm not calling this romance because I cannot get a romance house to publish me.
Nicholas Sparks can get anybody to publish him though. So.
Yeah. So,
Well, we're talking about the, how, you know, science fiction sort of, how science fiction and romance don't match, which seems a little strange to me because that's precisely how the Spider-Man franchise is always sold.
Right.
we're actually not saying science fiction and romance don't mix. We're saying that
Predominantly in
publishing companies and marketing people
They're afraid.
are still holding on to the
Still
belief that they don't
afraid.
mix.
Yeah, they're afraid of it.
No, my point is that I'm a guy, so I do generally come at it from a Peter Parker angle.
Sure.
Well, but if you leave out Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy or whoever you're using, you can't do that mythos.
But the fact that you said Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy or whoever you're using shows that that's not that important actually to that story. The main Spider-Man mythos, really, that origin story is what's hit for everybody.
But my
So-
point is that you can't have that, you know,
Yeah,
you can have a strong romance component.
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
And to the extent where there was actually a line at one point that was, I mean, all I'm saying is that, and so, is that, you know, now I couldn't write that, but, no,
Sure.
no.
No, we agree with you 100%.
But
Yeah.
romance-driven plots are pretty much the core of superhero genre.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them.
I mean, it's not, again, it's not a romance, but it is but
What-
romance drives the plot in almost all
What the
superhero.
superhero genre is afraid of, what they're really afraid of is the happily ever after.
Right.
Because they're so scared
Right.
that they can't tell a story with a Spider-Man who's married very well, or with a Spider-Man who's going out there with a toddler that he has to come home to at night, which is
Well,
as a comic writer, this predominantly, that frustrates me beyond anything else.
I'm not sure that the writers are scared of that. I
It's
think
the
that
editors.
I'm not even sure the editors are scared of it, but but again, the salespeople
Yeah, they're being-
are terrified that no one will buy it, even
Right.
if it's well written.
Right, yes, yeah.
I mean,
There's
nobody-
There's
yeah.
always the question.
I think
who's
the
the
Fantastic
bad guy?
Four proves the opposite of that.
I mean, again,
you start with a
Well,
family,
think about
right?
Elf
or
Quest, okay?
you look at the
Correct,
again.
yeah.
So ElfQuest, the first 5 issues of ElfQuest, okay, 1 through 5. Cutter goes to the village and he meets Lita. Will they get together? Will they not get together? Recognition, oh my god. Classic romance novel. And it tells a complete arc. By the end of that arc, Cutter and Lita are now together. After that, there's this huge, epic 35 years of ElfQuest. And Cutter and Lita are separated by time and da-da-da-da-da, but they are always Cutter and Lita. They're always together. We might worry that one of them might die. We might worry that something bad might happen to them. But we know that in terms of being an established couple, that's been done. So that's kind of a way that you can get your happy ever after. The problem with doing it in comics or like in a series, paranormal series, get into this all the time, is that to have a happy ever after ending, you have to end. And so comics have fantastic romances, wonderful love stories, but they usually don't have like
You
that
never want a comic
payoff
to
at
end
the
because you
HEA
keep on-
because-
There is
right,
that.
Keep on having
it's
another
not.
one.
Series.
I mean, but so the ultimate. I mean, again, I hate praising Disney this much, but again, not much. I love Disney, but again, for looking at superheroes and looking at romance and looking at and really totally deconstructing and rebuilding the superhero genre and making the married superheroes with kids' story work. All you have to do is look at The Incredibles.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, The Incredibles does everything that you should never be able to do in a superhero story,
Yeah.
and it does it beautifally. It breaks
That's why
every
it's
damn
an
rule.
incredible movie.
There's a question in the comment in the back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, remember, Pixar runs Disney now, so.
Yeah,
That was before.
No
True.
grapes.
okay.
I thought there were, no, Incredibles was after the merger. Incredibles
I don't know
was
my
well after the
Pixar
merger.
Disney timeline.
Well, Lasseter and George have had
The
this
thing with-
concept for a long time.
The thing with comic books is what you do, like in the case of ElfQuest, where you have the Cutter and Lita, they get together, we've gone through that whole romance thing. Well, they have a family, and each of those children have their own romance
Right.
stories, so
True.
you kind of follow that too. But in the case of the Fantastic Four, John Byrne wrote a number of domestic scenes.
And it was beautiful.
With them, and they were gorgeous.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
really beautifully done. And his philosophy was like in comic books, you give the appearance of change without ever really changing. That's why, like when the Hulk leaves the Fantastic Four, you've got She-Hulk. When the Thing leaves the Fantastic Four, you've got She-Hulk come in. She fills that niche. It's the
Sure.
same. It's the same. So the dynamics sort of stay the same. You never change.
Well, mainstream comics is like television.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
And episodic television is,
You can't change it so
or
much.
especially
The
sitcoms.
next series,
Yeah,
next
every
series has
season.
to pick up where it left off.
Yeah, what I'm
Yes.
so glad for, because of the BBC, a number of really good enclosed stories that have run like 2 or 3 seasons, and like Breaking Bad, we've got novels done.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, things actually end.
yeah,
Yes,
it's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
I'd like to see how you'd address, you talked about a lot of the tropes with the male and female. What about for male-male romance or female-female romance? How do the tropes manifest in there
Do the
differently?
rules change?
Well, I have
Oh.
just started reading male-male and female-female romance, and I find so far that the tropes don't change the whole time. One of my twists is that, remember, I'm reading science fiction and fantasy romance primarily. I do read a lot of historical, and I do read some contemporary, but the bulk of what I read is sci-fi. The nice thing about science fiction, male-male and female-female, is that you can just assume, a writer can just build into this world that we accept these relationships now. And that means that the book can be about this couple and when they're going to get together and and how are they going to get together, and not can 2 gay people possibly ever be happy.
Which is the old, basically, well of loneliness. Just
Right.
well of
Loneliness, yes. Has
It was-
anybody else
or-
read Well of Loneliness?
Yeah, or
Just,
is
Or
the fact,
transgender people be safe.
no, I mean, the oh my God, the fact that they're still doing this damn story Brokeback Mountain, that you can't have a happy ending.
and I think there's a really important
And that was
place-
the old thing, was you couldn't have a happy ending.
Right. I think there's a really important place in literature for exploring how difficult these issues can be for people today, but it is
But it's 30
also
years ago.
refreshing.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but the thing is that it really is, it's 30 years ago. I mean, I love that I did a lesbian lit class in college, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And it was really, we were going through there's stuff written in the 20s and the 30s, and basically the editors are driving it to there can never be a happy ending for these people. These people are deviant, and there can't be a happy ending.
Right.
Which came back to why Brokeback Mountain pissed me off so much. And then it did develop into, well, maybe it's complicated, but you can have a happy ending, like say a Desert of the Heart.
Yeah.
And you get into some of the stuff in the 70s and in the 80s, and suddenly the stories are different.
Now, you can also take it another direction in sci-fi fantasy. You could create a horrifying dystopian world that you can really, really pile on and address.
Science
issues like
fiction's always been able to break the rules
Yeah.
in that regard, and I mean, even you go back to Heinlein's 60s novels. I mean, you look at The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and look at the romantic element in there. Yeah, it was kind of boy girl, but it was boy girl girl boy girl, and it was
Highland was
he had a really interesting
Yeah,
thought process.
interesting and in some cases problematic.
But he let it out on the page, and when I read that book for the first time, I thought, okay, I can buy this,
Yeah.
and as long as you tell that right and you tell it with real people,
There-
you're not gonna have a problem you're not gonna have a problem as long as they're people and they're not stereotypes of what they're supposed to be.
Now, the snake there with a lot, I mean, most male-male romance is written by women. Not all of it, but most of it.
True.
And, I mean, and if you roll back to the 70s and Slash, pretty much all Slash was written by women and still is written by women. And there is a problematic issue there of what a friend of mine referred to as, for Slash, which granted, you're getting into erotica at that point, but it's like you have two hot young men who are making out like middle-aged women in bed together.
Yes.
It's just it is a case of, there is a lot of male-male romance where the mindset, the way the characters interact is far more a feminine viewpoint.
Yes.
And and I'm not going to say it's not the way, and I'm not going to say that all guys don't work this way, but a lot of guys don't work this way.
Yeah, you have to have taken the time to understand who your characters are. This goes back to good writing is good writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If the author has taken the time to research and figure it out and really gotten to know these people, that's going to show on the page.
True.
Yeah.
And if they haven't, then it's really going to show on the page.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of male-male romance and male-male erotica that is people who aren't necessarily good writers who are cashing in.
Or
Because-
they're good
because-
writers, but they haven't learned their audience,
Yeah.
and it
They
really shows.
haven't really figured it out.
Well,
It does show. So I would-
or there's a disconnect between their audience and reality.
Yeah.
Well, I would never have taken on the idea that I could write a romance and have half the story told from the female point of view unless I'd been writing female point of view a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, the protagonist in this whole series is a woman, and so I've really gotten to know a completely different way of thinking about problem solving and making it work as a woman. And so even though she's a fish, to make her identifiable to the human reader, I have to have her thinking like what people would expect a woman to think.
Yeah.
So I had to, I had to really make sure I understood that before I'd even attempted it. Otherwise, it's not going to come through on the page.
Yeah.
Back in the 50s and 60s, wasn't a lot of the lesbian romance written by men?
Actually, the scary thing is that lots of some of it was written by men. It's surprising how much of it was actually written by Marion Zimmer Bradley.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, so but it was also primarily written
By men for men.
by men for a male audience, which again, it has, as a number of my friends have said, it has these same problems, except for more problematic versions of the same problems as women writing male-male romance or male-male erotica, who really, they're writing their fantasy rather than understanding what their characters' fantasies would more likely be. And that's actually, I mean, that's a character development thing.
Yeah.
And that's a basic problem, and that's a basic difficulty in all romance, is separating what your fantasy of the characters is and figuring out what the characters' fantasies
Well,
really
this
are.
is, okay, now here's, we're touching on a topic that we've touched on several times, but this, the mixture of romance and science fiction. In science fiction, you have people solving problems. They're taking what they've learned and solving a problem. And what they feel about it is just gravy.
Depends on the science fiction.
I understand.
Yeah. He's talking hard
I'm
science
saying,
fiction.
at its heart,
Yeah.
you could take, now, it's not going to be worth reading, it's going to be empty characters, it's going to be very
Yeah.
cardboard stuff, but you can accomplish a science fiction
It's a totally
story
plot-driven story, yeah.
without actually knowing how any of the people feel about it.
Yeah.
Well, that's
In a romance, you can't.
Yeah.
Right.
It's about people's feelings.
Here's another thing you
And
should
so
understand.
that could
So, go ahead.
be part of the oil and water mix.
Yes. And if you are writing this as a writer, I had this really profound comment that she said, one thing that you need to understand is that romance is an intensely personal genre for readers. So, I can tell you that Riveted and Iron Dew by Michelle Mulgene Brooke are both technically, I think, as well written. But I don't run around in the streets screaming, you have to read Iron Duke, because that whole broody alpha hero thing, that doesn't personally do it for me.
Right.
What personally hit all my buttons was the hero in Riveted. Oh my God, he's just so wonderful. Just Riveted is just the best book ever. And that difference between, wow, this book is really, really good, and this evangelical fervor with which I want to hand you copies, that's personal. And romance is very personal.
Can you talk about,
Oh, actually, behind you first.
Is Riveted the one that takes place mostly in Iceland?
Which is what?
Is Riveted the one that takes place mostly in Iceland?
Yes.
Okay, I'm making sure I have the right one.
Oh,
Thank
it's awesome.
you. See,
Yeah.
for me, it's completely the other way around.
That doesn't surprise me. And
I
because
understand what you're
that's
saying, but it's very
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah.
These are about our emotional buttons.
Yeah.
Jennifer Cruzy is another one. She writes contemporary. She's fantastic. And then she started writing some kind of paranormal science stuff. And I have five copies to bet me, so I can give them to people. Other people are much more interested in some of her other books. And the difference isn't that she wrote one book better than another book, although some of her books I do think she's written better than other books. The difference is, bet me, is like she wrote it for my personal issues. She went, "Dear Carrie, this is for you. Love, Jennifer." Boom. And that's, so, and remember that too, if people are reviewing your work. Because sometimes after a review, and I'm like, well, it didn't make me all swoony, but technically it was good. Go ahead.
So that just brings my question. I wanted to know a little bit about these non-typical hero traits. So you're talking, you've got the alpha male, who's kind of the typical romantic hero that we've already talked about a little bit, right? Whether he's rapey or not rapey, he's got alpha male traits.
Right.
So can you talk, because I've seen in straight romances, like movies like Notting Hill, like kind of the Hugh Grant type of character. Like,
Yeah.
The sensitive.
So we're talking like the
Sensitive.
beta male as opposed to
well,
the alpha male,
well,
or like Jim in The Office. I think is a
Yeah.
good example where he's like in the background. He's not your go-getter alpha guy at all.
Yeah.
So can you talk about
These
some
marriage-
what you've seen
These guys are
the evolving
marriage. These
heroes?
guys are marriage material.
I can go back to
That's a
Bujold on
different
this
kind of hero.
pretty quickly. If you look at the Komar book specifically, not really as much as the Civil Campaign.
One.
Miles in that book, I mean, he is a dwarf. He's mutated. He's everything in her society.
Well, he's not actually mutated. He's a dwarf.
Right,
he's
correct.
he's a dwarf. He's chemically
Seen
poisoned.
as
He's
a
perceived as a mutant in a
But he's perceived as
culture that
everything in
hates
this
it.
culture that this woman should hate, and she is just
Everything's
beautiful
wrong with
and smart, but she's in a messed up relationship. And so the entire book has him, even though he's a very alpha personality in terms of he's just got a lot of drive, he's going, please notice me.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but that resonated a lot to me, as a dorky guy. You look at your ideal woman, she's the alpha, and you just want her to notice you, and that's a cool twist on that story.
We had a great
I mean,
discussion.
the alpha type hero
Yeah.
is, and the best thing on that is all based on entirely discredited animal psychology at this point. Your classic alpha hero doesn't have any of the insecurities that most guys really have. Guys are just usually really good at hiding really huge amounts of insecurities.
It's like no one walks like Gaston.
Well, we had this great discussion on Smart Niches of what should we call these heroes who are different than these swaggering alpha controlling guys. And we're like, I think we settled on Omega heroes. But we also had
Because they're the ones you actually want to end
I
up
like
with.
it.
We had a special spot in our heart for what we called the purse holder hero. And we came up with the purse holder hero because one of our commenters said that she had undergone chemotherapy for years. And everybody get off of one. Every time she would go for her chemotherapy, the waiting room was filled with these men. And they were big, burly, strong men, and they're sitting there waiting for their wives to come out, and they're holding the purse on their lap, these pink purses. The guy who will hold your purse while you're in chemo, that's the guy.
That's
Give me that
true.
romance guy, I will follow that guy anywhere. Now, David in Riveted, he's a scientist. You kind of have that feeling like he's competent. There's a part where he has to carry the heroine someplace. It's not because she's wussy. There's a good reason for it. And he can do it. He can step up and contribute to this action sequence. But he's attentive to what she's thinking about. he was trying to persuade her to do something, but he's not controlling. He listens to her. He's trying to work with her. He's trying to persuade her. And so I think we came up with Omega Hero, but that's one of the differences, I think.
And so,
Purse holder works.
yeah, the purse holder, the guy who is always, he's doing the little supportive things that don't get noticed.
That's
This
right.
is not to be confused with the nice guy who thinks that women are vending machines,
Yeah.
and if you're nice to us, then
Yeah.
sex falls out. That's a different
Yeah.
kind of guy.
But, so with the oil and water stuff that we were talking about before, it's some of this, if you look at the evolution of science fiction of the early days of, it's adventure stories and it's technology fetish driven, and that's the kind of stuff that, with
Finish your sentence.
yeah, but the kind of stuff where it's strongly plot driven and the characters aren't really, and the characters' feelings aren't really relevant.
Right, yes.
That kind of thing that, I mean, it still happens, but
Yes.
it was much more prevalent
Yeah.
in earlier science fiction.
Yeah.
You get that, and then you get the move along to the more world building oriented and character oriented science fiction, because you can't really do world building oriented science fiction without being character oriented.
Right.
And you get to, say, China Mieville, who everybody goes like, see, and he's just won the best fantasy awards. Like, what are these people thinking? This is not fantasy. This is the hardest hard science fiction I've ever read. It just happens to be social sciences, not physics.
Yeah.
And it's very character driven, and very relationship driven, and strange and weird and psychotic, but that's a whole other story.
Well, I think since I was the one who brought up the notion that science fiction is about problem solving and romance is about emotions, let me refine my thesis. I
don't think we were taking that as the only thesis.
Yeah,
It was just
it's
a perception.
It's worth refining. Let me say that science fiction could be characterized as we are resourceful enough to solve this.
Oh, yes.
So you have like the first Iron Man film is the self-made man. That's like the epitome of science fiction. The idea that you have at your disposal or in your knowledge things you just need to tap into, that you can solve anything because of what you know or can figure out. Whereas, but that only worked for the one movie. By the time you get into any of the other films or anything else with the character, you better start talking about how he feels about things, or he's just going to be a big piece of cardboard inside of an iron suit.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't stay there for very long. You have to start talking about how he feels.
This is why I love coming to panels. Something you said just clicked something.
Good.
You were talking about science fiction is problem solving and romance is more about your emotions, and it suddenly hit me. That must be why steampunk is so popular, because it's still got that. We can solve this. But there's a lot more of emotion in there too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the reason, the other thing is, you just said, you were talking about the purse holder hero, and that's what suddenly clicked for me, is that's why I like the Iron Duke, because to me, he is a purse holder hero.
He is a great way to do an alpha hero, because she really clearly demonstrates that he may fight with her about her purse. He may steal her purse and hide it. He may do all kinds of things to trick her into not having a purse. But we all know, right, that if she needs that purse to be held, he will hold the purse.
Yes.
And so if you are going to do like an alpha hero and make it work, ultimately, there always has to be that moment where Lydia has run off with Wickham, it's a disaster, what will happen? And Darcy will step up. He has to be there for her at some point.
Well, I'll extrapolate
Part of
that.
the problem with the alpha too, and I think one of the reasons I like purse holder hero better than Omega hero, is because they've actually done more recent research on the alpha, that kind of thing. One of the things they found out is what they categorize as alphas, which is the really dominant, the really aggressive, not dominant, the really aggressive males. Frequently are the ones that nobody wants anything to do with, because they are too aggressive, because they don't know how to back down from a fight or win. And
Well, I mean, the pop psychology alpha stuff, though, is based on captive wolf pack research, which is completely discredited, because it turns out that in the wild, wolf packs are family groups,
yes,
and it's parents and children,
and offspring.
it's parents and offspring. And the way that the captive wolf pack that was assembled together out of not a family group interacted was totally aberrant.
Yes.
So, and yeah, but when you look at primate studies, yeah, exactly.
The interesting thing about that is that if you want to borrow from that, you can.
Yeah.
I think that, but you want to do some more recent research.
Well, it's
And there's some
actually,
really fascinating recent primate research that shows what makes a good leader. I'm not going to say alpha because we have emotional baggage with that. Is someone is a male that can negotiate.
Yeah.
And that might be interesting to put in a romance. I don't know.
I
don't
think-
write them.
and that gets into some other wacky social and organizational psychology stuff of the difference between people who are leaders and people who are managers
Yeah.
and people who are neither.
Followers.
Followers are different than people. You can have someone who's not a successful leader and not a successful manager and not a successful follower.
That's true.
Well, I think one of the shifts that we've seen is that one of the things that's exciting about an alpha hero is that you feel like this person can protect you. And a lot of times in male and female, one person is the alpha. So this person will take care of you, they'll protect you. And what we're seeing more of now that I really like is sort of an exchange of protection, so that the woman is able to be more, sometimes she is as physically competent as the hero, sometimes she's more physically competent as the hero, sometimes she's better at other stuff. But there's more stuff where she's helping him out and he's helping her out. And the way that they used to do that old school was that he would protect her physically. The alpha male would protect the woman physically, except from himself. And she would protect him mentally and morally. She was the moral
compass.
Moral compass. Because we've kind of grown a little bit in how we think about gender. Now there's more variations on that. There's much more people fighting side by side or taking turns. You know, there's parts in Riveted where what's her name is protecting David, and there's parts where David has to pick her up and carry her around. You know, but it's not just all David picking her up and carrying her around. But we do kind of want somebody who we think will be able to step in when we need help.
Cool. Any other questions?
Well,
I
something that's right.
think our 90-minute mark, so.
Okay, yeah. People might want to like eat and things. So I have a couple gateway romances if you're interested in reading some just straight up romance. A Civil Campaign by Lois McMaster Bujold, of course.
I'd read Komar first.
I will confess that actually I read Civil Campaign before I read Komar. And it did work as a standalone, but I have had many people tell me it's a lot more emotionally powerful if you read Komar first.
If you have the baseline character development that got them to a civil campaign,
Yes.
it's the impact is much greater.
Impact is greater. So that is she has called it a Regency romance set in space. So basically what you have is a Regency romance model formula set in a hard sci-fi setting. If you're interested in steampunk, I may have casually mentioned that I liked Riveted once or twice by Mel Jean-Book.
I'll also throw in Soulless by
Parasol
Gail,
Protection.
yes.
Gail Carriger. She does a great romance in that book and keeps an interesting steampunk world building throughout the entire series. So.
Zoe Archer online, she has a steampunk book called Skies of Gold, which is fantastic. She has a couple of hard sci-fi collision courses, really good. And that's Carina Press has that. So if you Google Carina Press, Zoe Archer, that should pop up. Collision course is really good. And collision course
It'll
is fun.
probably autocomplete.
What's that?
If you punch into Google, it'll probably autocomplete before you finish it.
Autocomplete, yeah. And also, if you want like time-traveling romantic comedy, to say nothing of The Dog by Connie Willis. Now, don't be lured into thinking that you're just going to get something by Connie Willis, because Connie Willis is another author who likes to try lots of different genres, and some of her stuff is dark, and some of her stuff is tragic, and some of her stuff is hilarious, but not romantic at all. But to say nothing of The Dog is more of a fun romantic comedy. You guys have any other ones? And Flying Spark?
Yeah, please read my comic. It's free. I post a new page every week. It's slow going in that it's only one page per week. But I'm building up a romance that's going to explode. So it's flyingsparkscomic.com, and yeah, it's free, so there's no downside.
Woohoo!
And there's pretty art.
It is, I love that art.
Thank
I
you.
like that art style.
I'm not sure that I have anything to recommend. I have some things, there are definitely things that I would,
You know, steer people away from it.
Well,
What do you think
I'm gonna be really, really awful and steer people away from something that one of the guests of honor at this convention did.
Nicholas Sparks.
No, the Wendy Peeney's Mask of the Red Death, it really is, it's the male-male romance, except for it is the, oh, but you can't, you can't have a happy ending at the end.
Right.
And granted, it is a
Because
redo, it's a redo of Mask of the Red Death, but it's still, I got to the end, it's like, and I'm squicked out by the, oh my God, what was going, why did I read this thing through to the end?
I think I would argue, my personal take was I love Mask of the Red Death, but that's one of those ones where marketing is all important. So it is erotica, it's male-male erotica, very explicit erotica,
Dark.
very dark. It is a retelling of Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is
Not a really, really faithful retelling of
No.
Mask of the Red Death, which
Edgar
is why
Allan
I'm
Poe
He's
gonna.
is
got
not
dark
known
roots
for
to
his
begin
happy
with,
endings,
so-
okay? So
It's not having our dark roots showing, right?
So if you are, I thought it was really high quality work, I thought it was really fascinating, but not a romance novel, not a romance comic. It's also online for free.
Yeah, true.
It's more of an exploration.
Yes, and very, 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 very dark and gruesome, and not to be read in the room
But how
with
sad, you're right, it ends up in the
small
same
children.
place. If you can't have a happy ending,
Yeah.
it sucks, you're right. Right, how can I not plug what I'm doing?
Do it.
It's called Mermaid Steel. I have it up on Facebook and on my blog, which is just Hartlove at WordPress. I'm putting up a chapter. As soon as I finish a chapter, I put it up. So it's this challenge to myself that I'm getting myself go back and do this. Name is Hartlove, Hartlove. It's called Mermaid Steel. Five chapters in
S-T-A-L?
S-T-E-E-L.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the male protagonist is a blacksmith.
Okay.
And one of the key cultural differences is that the mermaids have basically been held in a Paleolithic culture in that they can't smelt steel underwater. The humans have moved on.
Yeah,
And so there's a huge, it's all about cultural differences.
okay.
But it is a romance in many other respects that we've talked about here today. But I write very personal stuff. The thrillers that I write are they're paranormal thrillers, but they're very personal. It's always very, very close, third person. You're always driven by what people feel. And so it really wasn't that big a step from horror and thrillers
Yeah,
into romance, because I'm already writing about how people feel,
yeah.
and it's already driving the stories is how they feel. As to, I mean, the medical mystery is actually, what sets it apart is that they only solve the mystery because of how they're reacting to things, not the actual science fiction-y part of it.
Yeah.
It's their emotions drive them to the answer. So stepping, I thought I was going to take a break from this to do with the romance, right? Because the third book in the series is giving me hairballs, and so I had to take a break and step back, and I did the romance. But I'm finding I'm falling right into it because I'm still writing about how people feel. So this has been a really, thank you for all the
Well, thank you much. Thank you
insights.
so much. Oh, we forgot to talk about the importance of biology. When you write a sex scene, there should be a reason why you're writing a sex scene. There should be a reason why the sex is happening. And there should be something revealed to us about the characters during the act. And if you are, actually any gender, because a lot of women don't necessarily know all of our internal parts, consult Wikipedia. The hymen is not located where romance novels traditionally tell you that it is, and it is not made of reinforced steel. So, I meant to talk about that when we talked about
Yeah, well, that's,
tropes that bug us. It bugs me when people do not understand biology, and it bugs me when people write an explicit sex scene that has no purpose except that it's page 60 and it's time for an explicit sex scene. Now, I have read explicit sex scenes that are phenomenal. They're extremely explicit, but not gratuitous at all, because the characters are revealed by their actions and how they do this act. Like in real life, that's the thing between people, and people change and grow in their relationship to each other through this act. And I'm all for that. But don't just do it because you're like at page 75 and you figure it's time for sex. So that's I've read a lot of these now, so I'm all jaded about how people don't understand where women's parts are. Do we have any from the audience? Any recommendations? Yes?
In famous, excuse me, Shades of Milk and Honey.
Oh,
and
yes.
the sequels, which are Jane Austen with a little bit of magic.
Yeah, they're wonderful. And the first book is a romance novel between the primary couple.
Yeah.
And then that relationship is kind of set up so the thing she kind of explores other relationships romantically in other books, but it's also very much a story about a marriage, and it's great because it's a strong relationship. That is amazing. She's an amazing, wow.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, I just adore her. Mary Robinette Kowal. She's got a reader.
She's in Brighton this weekend.
She's what?
She's in Brighton
this weekend.
yeah.
She spends her whole life on the road.
Yeah.
writing
Yeah,
her books.
pretty much,
She,
yeah.
her husband
Well, except for when she's writing.
is a stranger back at home.
She was on writing excuses for like all season or something.
Yeah, she's.
Oh, no, she's a regular
She's a
contributor
regular
on Writing
writing.
Excuses, but she Skypes
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, Joel suggestion that John mentioned before, the Sharing Knife series. It's a four-book series with about a world that has that's facing a potential critical problem, and the romance that's involved between the two main characters is the key to solving it.
She puts the romance first, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
What's the series? What's this one?
Sharing Knife series.
What knife?
Sharing Knife.
Sharon, though.
Sharing the knife?
Sharing knife.
Oh,
No,
sharing
no.
Now, if you want a blogger to read besides the folks at Smart Bitches Trashy Books, there is a German author, translator, book blogger, feminist. She's got a really, really fabulously interesting perspective on English language genre stuff. Her name is Cora Buhlert, B-U-H-L-E-R-T. She blogs regularly. She does some really, really good genre blogging, and she does some fantastic stuff about sexism in the industry, sexism in genre. She did her Girl Cooties series, this was actually, she's one of the people who keeps me up on folks saying stupid things on the internet. And the Paul Cook article in Amazing Stories, whereas he wants us science fiction, hard science and sciencey and masculine, and Lois is really a romance writer that's just masquerading as a science fiction writer. Yeah, so that's but Cora skewers people who deserve to be skewered, and is one of the best linked catalogers of anything interesting going on in genre that's
blogging in English?
She blogs in English, yeah. She most of her stuff is written in English, and she does a lot of translation of English to German, of science fiction in and out of German. So, but yeah, she blogs in English. So
I have my own blog also, geekgirlinlove.com, and I have bookmarks that you guys can use.
Cool.
Okay, well,
Thanks
this
for
is
coming,
an
guys.
awesome panel. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.